Hello and welcome back to the Conflict Skills Podcast. I'm your host, professional mediator Simon Goode. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about calm down, that particular phrase, and I'm thinking of that because I've been watching Trailer Park Boys, and I love it when Julian's sort of through gritted teeth almost yelling, "Calm down, Ricky." And I've noticed that it tends to be one of the go-to, I think, probably number one mistakes that most people make. In particular, I think it's a lot of husbands and partners and boyfriends' go-to strategy. And of course, saying that word, calm down, tends to be all that it takes to make things a lot worse. So in today's episode of the podcast, I'm going to be talking about 5 different common conflict mistakes so that you can be aware of them and, potentially avoid a lot of headaches for yourself down the track. In this podcast, I provide free resources and tools for dealing with conflict, whether that's in workplace situations or in your personal life. So if that sounds like something that would be useful for you, please consider pressing subscribe. And if you do find the episode today helpful, I would very much appreciate if you would be willing to leave a positive review. I know it's not the kind of thing that most people are used to doing, given the fact that everybody's constantly bombarding you with requests to leave a review. But for a tiny little podcast like this, it does make a massive. So calm down. Why is that particular phrase so upsetting and triggering for a lot of people? Well, I suppose the risk is that it comes across as essentially minimizing. You're dismissing the thing that the other person's upset about and essentially saying that you should calm down. Like, in other words, you are overreacting to the current situation. And one of the things that people often find that causes them to escalate is a sense of being criticized. When someone gives you feedback or observes something that you've done wrong, then obviously the natural response is that you become defensive and probably resistant if they were asking you to do something, for example. And calm down, unfortunately, it tends to create a number of different problems. First, it's got the criticism part, but there's also a sense of pressure. So, in most situations, there are better phrases to use than calm down. At the very least, it might be helpful to say something like, "Let's just both do our best to keep calm." There's this mutual element versus like, "You need to calm down." And it's like, "Let's just do our best," or "Hey, let's focus on keeping calm for now. I know this is a challenging topic to discuss." And of course, both of us will have different points and topics that cause us to escalate. As much as possible, I'm going to do my best to, I guess, regulate my own nervous system, even though for me this is a touchy subject, and for you to let me know if you need to take a break or if there's something that I'm doing that you're finding particularly challenging. So there's a different way of approaching it there, isn't it? It's sort of saying, like, we're in this together, first of all. And when I'm talking about what needs to change, I start with myself. And in that sense, I'm encouraging the opposite kind of reciprocity from the other person. Instead of me criticizing them and then they become defensive, what tends to happen if we go down this other path is that they see me being willing to be flexible. They see me being self aware. They see me taking responsibility for my emotions and not letting it trickle into my speech or my behavior, etc. And so the invitation, of course, is that they might do the same. And even if they don't, you might be surprised at the way that this impacts the power dynamic between the two of you. I don't know if you've ever talked to someone and they've just really lost it. Like, they become almost shrill and they're screeching and talking really quickly or whatever. And I have to say, it can be difficult to respect people in that kind of situation, given the fact that, well, they're not able to manage their emotions. Obviously, this situation has gotten the best of them. And so I think, in a sense, then your respect for that person might drop a little bit. But certainly, in terms of the dynamic in the discussion, you might notice that they become more desperate, or they all of a sudden decide that they might be flexible, or they just want to stop. So instead of giving you this endless barrage, just the fact that you're able to stay calm and take responsibility for your own emotions yourself often means that they don't have a sense that they're affecting you. So if that's their goal, is to get a rise out of you or whatever, you might find that they stop earlier than otherwise. The second mistake I think that often comes with that is another phrase. It's "I understand." That is also, I think, connected to this sense of minimizing, like, how could you understand type of thing. It's almost like you've assumed that you've got the full and complete set of information on this problem. So then why is my input needed at all? And that is often incongruent with the other words that the person's saying. especially if I say I understand that, but obviously there's an incongruence there because I'm saying, yes, I can fully understand where you're coming from, but, and then I'm going to tell you the exact opposite kind of thing. Our policy doesn't allow for that or whatever. It's often much more helpful to use a phrase like at the same time or and. So, look, this seems to be where you're coming from. At the same time, this is my limit in terms of what I can approve or that kind of thing. But I actually often find it more helpful to use a phrase like, I couldn't understand what this has been like for you. My gosh, I can only begin to get my head around some of the experiences that you must have gone through, given all of these different challenges that you've faced along the way. And I suppose, in a sense, we do need to do that in a genuine way. Like, I actually do imagine how stressful this might have been for the person that I'm talking to. And so, in a sense, that's what I'm empathizing with. It's their perception of the situation. That sounds like a really challenging spot to be. Like, I'm not implying that you're fully justified in your behavior or your response, etc. But what I do want to do is give a sense that the initial reaction, their automatic thoughts, their emotions that are connected to something that happens, to some extent are valid. It's like, that's okay. It's fine that you feel this particular way. At the same time, this is my view, or this is the other side of the story, or whatever else you decide to do to respond. But all of that will be received very differently compared to if you just go in guns blazing, I'm right, you're wrong. And then, of course, the other person gets their guard up, and before we know it, we're in a little bit of a battle or a debate or something like that. Number three, I think another common mistake that people make is what I call cornering the cat. You can all imagine a little squirrel or a cat, or we have in Australia a possum or something like that. When they get in the corner, they feel trapped and they feel scared, and their fight or flight mode activates, and they often come out scratching. And they scratch in all directions. It's this frantic, frazzled, random almost aggression, and it's part of our survival mechanism. It's like a last ditch effort. If we're cornered by a predator, then it doesn't particularly matter what we do. We might as well just do our best to defend ourselves. And so deciding whether or not this hit is going to be accurate doesn't matter. Try your best to hit the predator that's attacking you, right? And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people take this approach where they put the other person on the spot. And whenever they feel like the spotlight's on them, especially if it's a public situation, or they feel like their mistake or their shortcoming is being really magnified and having a spotlight shone on it, then of course they become erratic and defensive, and they might be a little bit like the cornered cat lashing out at you and other things around you. I was talking to my dad this morning, and he was talking to me about a previous person that he worked with, that they made a particular decision that he disagreed with. And at the time, he'd said something along the lines of, I think we should do this. This bit of equipment needs replacing or something. And the other person said, no, it'll be right, or whatever it was. I don't agree, you're wrong, or something like that. It sounds like they were a little bit rude in that initial exchange from my dad's point of view anyway. But he was talking about deciding to take a little bit of a deferential approach. It was like, almost like you got to pick your battles sometimes. And it's like, all right, well, if that's the decision that you've made, you're going to have to live with the consequences, kind of thing. And so I suppose that was probably his motivation when he came up to the guy later and said, look, I was right. I told you this would happen. And look, this bit of equipment is broken. So there. Even when he was telling me, I have to admit that I just paused because I'm looking at him a little bit incredulously, like, what did you expect to happen? Like, if you go up to someone and say, I was right, you were wrong, look at this, so there. I mean, what do you expect? That they'll be groveling and say, you were 100% right, Pete. Good on you, mate. I'm going to respect your opinion next time. Of course not. Like, we have egos. People have, well, a reputation to protect, but even our self-perception. We want to think about ourselves as capable and important and correct and above average and all the rest of it. I mean, the sad reality is that not everybody can be above average, despite the fact that I think it's about 80% or something of people rank themselves as above average in terms of IQ. But of course, that's a standardized test, so it will be literally 50% are above and 50% are below the average. But, it's just so funny. I think all of these, they're just so human, aren't they? We can so easily identify with all of these petty motivations, like I want to prove that I was right, or I want to put them in their place or something like that. I suppose at its most altruistic interpretation, my dad wanted to show the other person that actually he had made a mistake and give him the opportunity to correct. I suspect he might have done it in a slightly different way if that was his only motivation, but there we are. So he did go up to this person and say, look, I was right, you were wrong. So there. And I think the other person had a little bit of a tantrum and lost it. And Dad was saying that it just doesn't work, cornering them like that. And so I suppose that's my motivation for putting that as the number 3 mistake on the list today. The fourth common mistake that I've noticed is some type of catastrophizing. It's like overreacting to a situation using overly inflammatory language, particularly I think when we describe our emotions, like, I just can't believe you would do this. I just can't believe you would forget soccer practice. It's every week on a Thursday. I mean, obviously it's frustrating when your partner has forgotten soccer practice, but I wonder what you expect the response to be when you approach it from this gritted teeth, like, how dare you? I'm outraged. I am so disappointed in you. You have let me down, type of thing. I mean, we're just turning up the heat. We're piling on more and more in terms of what's at stake. And so then the other person obviously will have a challenging time backing down and admitting that they were wrong and saying sorry, or admitting fault and agreeing to do something different next time. I think in a similar way, people often inadvertently drop bombshells, like they might imply that they're thinking about leaving their partner, for example, and considering a divorce, or they might imply something like with their business partner that they're just not sure which direction they should go anymore, and I just don't know if this is the right fit between us anymore. And they might be feeling distressed in the moment, and there's particular things they're upset about, like the business partner might be doing something that's not working for them. But we could approach it in a much more direct and contained way if instead we focus on the actual behavior. This seems to be a pattern between us. This is what you're doing. This is what I've observed. This is my take on the situation. What do you make of it, kind of thing? As opposed to saying, it just feels like everything is wrong at the moment, or I've just had this sick feeling in my stomach for months. I mean, what do you expect the other person to feel when you drop a bombshell like that? Of course, they'll feel some sense of like panic. Oh my goodness, what's going on here? Like, we're inviting them to go into this crisis mode way of thinking, and then with that comes the physiological escalation, and then with that comes the limitation on their volition and behavior. So they might say it's something that they regret, or they might misinterpret something that we're saying. And instead, if we focus, as I say, often on their behavior, but we should really do our best to reduce the sense of what's at stake. We want to reduce the sense of perceived pressure because that will put them in their best mindset. That will give them the most access to the rational side of their brain. So I suppose in a way it's in our best interests not to freak them out by using overly catastrophizing or bombshell type of language. The final mistake that I think people often make in terms of conflict is that they jump to too simple a solution. A lot of the time when I'm doing conflict resolution training workshops, people ask me a question like, what should I do about this? I've got this contractor and they're constantly agreeing to be on site tomorrow with 5 guys, and then I show up and they're not there. And like, I can talk through options for dealing with a contractor. Like, maybe we talk about what's called positive confrontations and then gradually ratcheting up the level of assertiveness through to giving them a final warning and then probably stopping the project or something like that. It would depend on the situation what the final consequence is that you do. I would imagine it would be not offering them any more work, or not paying them, or insisting that they fix this particular thing or change this particular thing if you're going to do your side of whatever the business arrangement is. But all of that, in a sense, I think is too simple a solution. And it's too simple a solution for 2 different reasons. First, if you're not aware of your own level of escalation, the things that are pushing your buttons, and what you need to do to look after yourself and regulate your own nervous system, then you're not going to think of the right words in the moment anyway. So it doesn't matter if you and me can come up with the perfect option in terms of phrasing and avoid this terminology and use this or whatever. Like, that's going to be helpful if you're in the right mindset to be able to do it. But if you're a little bit frazzled and flapped and you're feeling overwhelmed, then you'll go into fight or flight mode and you're not going to think clearly. You're not going to remember the correct phrasing, and it's not going to go as well as it could have gone otherwise. So that's the first problem to me, is that people want the answer, they want the recipe, they want this too simple solution. And it's not just dealing with me and in conflict. I think they often come up with, this is the answer, this is what needs to happen. Often it's, you need to do what I think is best, kind of thing. But you've got an idea of what you think is best. And that's fine, but if you go into a conflict resolution process, like you're talking about a problem with someone, and you've already decided what the outcome should be, well, how are they going to feel during that process? Obviously, they're not going to feel like their input is particularly important, given the fact that you're not demonstrating any ability to be flexible or to incorporate it into your plan anyway. So it's fine to have an initial position or a set of options or some type of a proposal as a starting point. But we want to do our best to present that and to talk about that and to deal with that as a starting point. It's like, look, I don't know. I mean, we might come up with something that's completely different to this at the end of the conversation. I wondered though if it would be helpful just to have, a few options to begin with, and you might have other ideas to add to the list as well. I mean, I don't particularly mind if you've got ideas. I'd be happy to start with them, or if it's helpful, I can walk you through what I've been thinking, and then maybe we can go from there. What do you think? So it's this very collaborative. It's like, hey, let's approach this in a pragmatic, solution-focused kind of way. I'm sort of introducing the type of behavior that I want to get back from them as a result, like being flexible and being non-inflammatory and this sense of give and take. And of course, we're both here to listen to each other's perspective. Of course, that will be important. So if your aim is to get buy-in and engagement and ownership from the other person, then I think avoiding coming in with that sense of you've already got the answer is something that's incredibly important. The other reason though that jumping to that too simple solution is it's not helpful is because you're literally a different person as you go through the process of talking about the conflict, like your body and your perception and your emotions and your thoughts and your ability to keep calm and your understanding of the situation and your ability to empathize with the other person will be different, which means that the set of options that you've got will be different. You might not actually need to give the other person as much if they have a sense that you've listened to them and that you're taking their issue seriously. You might find that actually they don't want anything if they have a sense of being really understood and validated. Maybe that's it for them. So that's the other reason for me is that jumping to this too simple solution is a problem. It's because, well, first of all, we might create extra headaches and work for ourselves. But just through the process of talking through the issue, you'll change. You'll have a different set of neurons firing. Like literally, you've got a different brain. You're a different physical being than you were before, which means that there might be different options that would be the best fit. So it's about the process of getting there, not just about the outcome of the discussion or the mediation or whatever the conflict resolution process is that you're engaged in. So I hope that that's been helpful for you looking at that particular mistake of calm down, and then there's other common mistakes around many, I think, different contexts surrounding conflict. If you've got feedback about the podcast, you can shoot me an email at podcast@simongoode.com. That's SIMONGOODE.com. And if you've got a request for a future episode, a case study, or a situation that you would like me to maybe discuss and present some options for dealing with, or if it's been helpful for you, consider please leaving a positive review. And otherwise, we'll hopefully see you again in a future episode of the podcast. Bye for now.